maybe the mix isn't working out the way you want it to, and it doesn't sound good no matter what you do. These are a couple of the reasons. Number one, you probably have way too many tracks in your song. Granted, this doesn't apply to people who have reasonable number of tracks, like 12, 15, 24. Anything less than 48, I'd say, is reasonable. When you get up to 128 tracks, you got to ask yourself, why? Why am I doing this? Am I adding another keyboard and another keyboard over the same spot, playing the same notes but with a different sound, and another keyboard? Am I doing all this additional stuff and additional tracking in order to cover up or compensate for the fact that what is happening isn't good enough? Because if that's the case, go back to the drawing board and stop recording, stop adding track after track after track after track. Get back to the point. If you can't get the point across in a few instruments, like a few tracks of drums, a few tracks of bass, a few tracks of keyboards, a few tracks of guitars, if you can't get it done with that and a few tracks of vocals, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something way, way, way wrong. Kings of Leon, Aha Shake Heartbreak, one of my favorite albums. I remember driving around listening to it. I remember exactly where I was. I remember what the weather was. And the funny thing, 12 tracks were the total amount of tracks on any song on that album. That album is magical. Now, this should just realize what's going on here. If the songs are great and the performances are great, you have no need for tons of tracks. It doesn't matter what genre it's in. Also, the concept of thinking that you need a new track every time you record a new vocal is also a ridiculous concept. You need to get the organization down. In other words, realize how to organize your sessions like a pro producer would record the thing. If you don't figure this out, you will have way too many tracks to be able to navigate that session successfully in a way that will allow you to make changes when you hear things you want to change, and just so you can control everything. If you want more of something, you know where it is, make it louder. You want more of this, you make it louder. Not when there's so many tracks. You got no shot at doing that without taking tons of time between the thought and then the action. You need to be quick. When you have the thought of what to change, you got to be able to find it and do it. So when I get a session that's overwhelmed with tracks, 120 something tracks, right? This happens a lot, way more often than you think, because way more people today are self-recording. So the first thing they do is think, oh, I might as well create a new track for this. Oh, I might as well create a new track for this. They'll have 35, 60 tracks of vocals because instead of putting the lead vocal all together on one track, meaning the thing you want featured, you're the guy recording it. You know what you want featured. And if you don't, you got to figure it out because you're the guy recording it, producing it. You got to figure out what you want featured and put it all together on one track. You shouldn't have a new track for another vocal that is supposed to be the lead on another track if there's no overlap. In other words, if nothing overlaps, if anything overlaps, like one line goes and the other one starts, that's the only time you need a new track. If it doesn't overlap, put it all together on one track. Then figure out what you want to accompany the lead and put that on its own track, and then wherever that exists in the song, put it all on that same track. Don't have 17 different tracks of vocals jumping around all over the place when nothing overlaps. And you're doing this for what reason? I don't understand. It may be this concept where you think that you can affect things differently by putting them on different tracks. So you think for some reason there's a benefit in having like a slightly different EQ on this vocal and a slightly different EQ on this vocal and a slightly different. It's not how it works. The way things work is we're trying to make everything heard very clearly, very audibly clear. The way you achieve that is through an organized recording process where everything is not jumping all over the place in terms of volume, because when it is that way, I have to basically make it even anyway. With clip gain and things, I'll make it even. But the goal here is to maintain a clarity the whole time. So that means if you have a harmony vocal and it's all on one track, it's very easy to make that clear, and then it will just be clear every time the harmony comes up, as opposed to it's on 17 different tracks. So now I have to figure out either to comp your own stuff, which is basically be an audio made and put together these 17 tracks into where it should be. In other words, comp the tracks. So, okay, this is all the same harmony notes, so they should all live on the same track. And I got to do that for you. And then I got to do this on the next note and the next note. That whatever other stuff you sang, okay, this is like some echoed voice, but it's on 7 tracks. So why? I don't know. They're not overlapping. So now I put them together. I'm becoming an audio made. And you may think to yourself, what, I'm paying you to mix a song. So yeah, well, I'd rather you do it than me. The point is, it's actually working against your benefit. It's contrary to your benefit to have the person mixing the song beat their ears up and put all your stuff together and be an audio made for 6 hours. Because let me tell you, by the time I'm done with that, I don't even like the song anymore. I mean, the song could be great, but after being an audio made for 5-6 hours or whatever it takes to organize your session for you, at that point, all my good decision making's out the window. So I have to come back on a new, fresh day to even do anything else. And all that time could have been spent making your song sound amazing through actual mixing, not being an audio made. Okay? There's a huge thing here where like the guy recording, engineering, producing needs to put the tracks together so that when they get sent off, they can actually just be somebody mixing it can sit down and start working. Without you doing the work to put it together in a way that makes sense, which should all be done as you're recording it. You know, comp your vocals as you're recording it so your lead vocals clearly what the lead is. And then comp your, you know, you got guitar takes going on. Let's say you've got 6 guitars layered over each other that are different performances. You have some blend of how that sounds good to you, which is why you did it. Why not just sum those all together and send the engineer that? Send the mixing engineer that, because then the blend between each one could be drastically different if I do it and I pick what I want to lead the pack and what I want to not be so heard. It's going to not be the same as what you're picturing because you put that together in some way. So put that together, sum that together so that I'm dealing with one guitar that's got all the sounds built in that I can then mix in a way that makes sense. This is what you should do with everything that you have layered over each other, like keyboards, anything like that. The only reason you wouldn't do it is if you want to leave that decision making up to the mixing engineer. But what I'm telling you is it's actually hurting you because the mixing engineer then has to make decisions that are going to sound different than what you had and what you were expecting based on your blend. And it could also make it take longer to mix, which means that the mixing engineer is getting his ears beat up more, which causes him to make worse decisions ultimately. It causes more time in the stage that's not mixing to decide what's going to lead the pack and what needs to be lower. And when you duplicate tracks in your session in order to like affect one different from another, consider the fact that there's really no good reason to not use an auxiliary bus, like an auxiliary track for that. When you use parallel effects, you can now send multiple things to them, multiple different instruments, and you don't have to rebuild that reverb sound every time. You could just use that reverb sound on all of these different instruments by deciding how much of them to send to the reverb. So by duplicating the track, it doesn't help you. And not only does it not help you, when you go to have somebody mix your song, you then have to delete all your duplicates. If you don't delete the duplicates, the mixing engineer is sitting there with 6 basses that all sound exactly the same for no reason. So like I said, every extra minute, hour somebody has to spend mixing your song, the mix is going to be worse by default. So it's in your interest to actually clear it up and make it concise and make it make sense and eliminate all the duplicates and make sure everything's faded in and out. Take out ridiculous breaths if you don't want them in there. Like, it's up to you to do all this so that your mix can be better at the end. Because there are some mixing engineers who won't even fix the breaths. Anything you give them, they leave it all in. It's actually more common than you think. I wind up doing everything in sight because I'm also coming from a place of I'm trying to teach people. So sometimes I'll tell them, look, you got to edit this stuff because I hear clicks and pops over every single edit where you punched in and it's obvious. And I'm going to have to spend a lot of time removing all that. Or you could just go in and clean it up, crossfade everything, and then send me the stuff again. So, because I'm actually somebody who teaches this stuff and gives lessons, like there's a learning that goes along with when you work with me. But at the same time, a session that's totally 120 something tracks for no reason is unquestionably a bit unnerving. It's a little bit like, come on, what are we doing here? You gotta have some basic understanding of put stuff together. If you've got a drum loop that exists in the verse and it's the same drum loop sound, it's just like a different part or something, but in the chorus and the whatever, comp them together. Your drums, if they're a loop, could be all on one track if it's the same drum sounds. And also consider there's no reason to layer loops over each other. Really, in other words, why are you doing it? If you're doing it because they're two complementary parts on each other, that's fine. But realize now you've got kick frequencies that are basically duplicated on multiple loops that are all fighting for the same 50, 60 hertz. They're all fighting for the same 40 to 60 hertz spectrum. And you put them on top of each other. So now there's twice as many frequencies fighting for that zone in the mix. What I would say is really, 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 really think about it this way. How few tracks can I use? How many tracks do I really need to make this song great? And if you don't really need it, don't use it. Think about this as you're building your stuff. How many tracks do I need to make this song great? And the less you use, the better, because that will let every instrument shine more. The more tracks you use, everything, the importance of every single track actually decreases a lot by adding more and more and more. The more density is within this track, everything gets less importance. Okay, so my first step when I deal with a song like I'm working on now is I got to organize it. So that means if there's 12, 15, 30 tracks of drums, they all get grouped as like, they're all color-coded pink. They all get sent to the drum bus. And now at least I got one fader dealing with all my drums. And I do this for bass, I do it for keyboards, I do it for guitars, and I do it for vocals, I do it for sound effects. At least at the end of that, I got my 5 faders of everything. Okay? At least then it's relatively manageable. But then if I go through and I find duplicates, now I'm sitting there eliminating duplicates. Got to figure out what's a duplicate. Why is it here? I don't need you to duplicate stuff. No mixer does. We'll duplicate it if we need. We don't want duplicates. We want double performances, which means you performed it again. It's very different than duplicating the track. Never a need to duplicate the track. There is a need to do a double performance. And if you're going to process stuff different ways, use an auxiliary bus. That way there's not a duplicate track. So that way when you send me stuff, it's just the tracks that are what you used in the song, not a duplicate of it and a duplicate of it. Now we got 7 basses all sound exactly the same. All right? Because I got to figure this out, which means takes time away from me making your song great. You want as much time going into making your song great as possible, not a lot of it spent being an audio maid, being pissed off, being upset that there's so much that has to be done before the mix can even begin. All right? So hope you dug it. Take this with you. It's a thing where people need to know how to do this. So anybody who is looking to become somebody who can mix stuff on a pro level, you got to learn how to organize your session when you're recording it, then when you're mixing it. You need to know these things. And if you're creating a new track, for every time you record something, you're doing it all wrong. Your stuff should be able to live on the same tracks when it's the same thing you're doing. If it's a supporting vocal, put it all on the same track. If it's a lead, put it all on the same track. Same with guitars. All right? Same with keyboards. How few tracks can you use to make this great? That's what you're going for. The least amount of tracks you could possibly use to make this great. That's what you're going for. All right? Throw something in the comment section. I really appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.